The day my daughter-in-law told me I wasn't welcome in the house, my hands were still smelling like lemon cleaner. I remember that small detail because I had been wiping down my kitchen counters, getting ready to bake my son's favorite pound cake. The one with the crisp edges and soft middle. The one he used to beg for when he was a boy. I had just taken the butter out to soften when my phone buzzed on the counter. Her name lit up the screen. Not my son's. Hers. I wiped my hands on a towel before answering, already feeling that tight pull in my chest I'd been ignoring for months. "Hi, Marissa," I said, keeping my voice warm. There was a pause on the other end. The kind that stretches just long enough to make you sit up straighter. "I wanted to let you know," she said finally, her tone clipped but polite, "that it's probably best if you don't come by the house anymore. It's just, we're setting boundaries." For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. "The house?" I asked. "You mean today?" "No," she said quickly. "In general." I looked around my quiet kitchen, the faded curtains, the hum of the refrigerator, the cake pan already set out on the counter. And then her next words landed like something sharp and cold. "It's our home now. And you're not invited." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even cry. I just said, "Okay," and hung up. But something inside me cracked all the same. Before all of that, before the phone calls that went unanswered and the invitations that stopped coming, my life was simple. Not easy but honest. Predictable in the way that brings comfort. I worked part-time at the local library, 3 days a week. I liked the quiet, the smell of old paper, the way people softened when they talked about books they loved. My husband had passed 5 years earlier, and the house still held him in small ways. The dent in his recliner cushion, the chipped mug he refused to throw away. My son, Daniel, was my only child. I raised him to be kind, steady, and thoughtful. Maybe too thoughtful. He had always been the type to avoid conflict, to smooth things over, to say yes when he meant maybe. When he met Marissa, I tried to be open. She was confident, outspoken, and polished in a way I never had been. She worked in marketing, wore heels even to casual dinners, and spoke with certainty about what she wanted from life. Daniel seemed dazzled by her. At first, I told myself that was a good thing. When they got engaged, they sat across from me at my dining table, fingers intertwined, glowing with plans and timelines. That was when the house came up. "We've been looking," Daniel said carefully. "But everything's just expensive." Marissa smiled tightly. "We don't want to rent forever." I knew what they were circling around before they said it. I had savings. Not a fortune, but enough. Money my husband and I had tucked away over decades, skipping vacations, driving cars until the wheels nearly fell off. "I could help," I said slowly, "with the down payment." Daniel's eyes filled immediately. "Mom, are you sure?" "I am," I said. "I want you settled. Secure." Marissa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her nails were perfectly manicured, cool against my skin. "That means so much to us," she said. "We'll never forget this." At the time, I believed her. The house they chose was modest but charming. Blue shutters. A small backyard. A porch that caught the afternoon sun just right. On closing day, I stood in the empty living room with them, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off bare walls. I handed over the cashier's check without hesitation. "It's your home," I told them. "Make it happy." For the first few months, I was welcome there. I brought housewarming gifts, dish towels, a potted fern, framed photos of Daniel as a child that made him groan and laugh. We shared Sunday dinners, sat around their new table, talked about paint colors and future plans. But slowly things shifted. Marissa started correcting me in small ways. The way I loaded the dishwasher, the brand of coffee I bought, the stories I told about Daniel's childhood. "He's not like that anymore," she'd say, smiling but firm. Then came the subtle exclusions. A dinner I heard about after it happened. A holiday plan mentioned casually in passing. Daniel grew quieter around me. He checked his phone more. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd say, "Yeah, Mom. Just busy." I told myself I was imagining it. That this was just what happened when children grew up and built their own lives. I didn't want to be the mother who clung too tightly. But there were moments, small unsettling ones, that stayed with me. Like the time I showed up unannounced with groceries because Marissa had mentioned being sick. She opened the door just enough to step outside, blocking the entry with her body. "Oh, you didn't have to do that," she said, taking the bags quickly. "Daniel's actually not home." I remember noticing the door clicking shut behind her. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Another time, I asked Daniel if I could keep a spare key, just in case. Marissa answered for him. "We don't really feel comfortable with that." Each time, I swallowed my discomfort. I told myself I was old-fashioned. That times had changed. Until the day she called and told me I wasn't invited to the house I had helped pay for. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the pound cake still unbaked, the butter melting back into its wrapper. I stared at my phone, waiting for Daniel to call. To explain. To soften the blow. He didn't. And that was when I realized this wasn't just distance. It was something deliberate. Something shaped and fed and carefully constructed while I wasn't looking. I didn't know it yet, but the story I thought I was part of had been quietly rewritten, without my consent. And soon, I would find out just how much had been taken from me. The next morning, the house felt smaller somehow. My own kitchen, my own walls, couldn't hold the sinking feeling in my chest. I kept thinking about that phrase. "It's our home now. And you're not invited." The words played on a loop, each repetition heavier than the last. I tried calling Daniel, leaving my voice calm and measured. "Honey, I just want to understand." He didn't pick up. I left a text. "I know something's going on. Please talk to me." No reply. So I did what I always did when I felt helpless. I tried to focus on details I could control. I baked the pound cake anyway. The smell of butter and sugar wafted through my house, golden and warm, but instead of comfort, it made the silence in my life louder. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit. Not to confront. Not yet. Just to see. To understand. I drove to their street slowly, tracing the same route I had taken countless times before. Imagining the sun shining through the blue shutters. Imagining Daniel smiling at me from the doorway. When I reached their house, Marissa opened the door before I could even knock. She looked different somehow. Polished, untouchable. She held a clipboard, straightened her posture, and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," I said softly. She shook her head. "I told you. Now's really not a good time. I just wanted to drop off a little something. Nothing fancy," I said, lifting the pound cake gently, as though offering a peace treaty. She hesitated, but her smile never softened. "Thanks, but Daniel and I are busy." Busy. That word felt sharp against my ribs. I nodded, turned, and walked back to my car. I wanted to yell, to cry, to knock down the door, but I didn't. I drove home, listening to the tires hum against the pavement, and felt something simmering in my chest. Something I hadn't let surface yet. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen. I wrote everything down. The small things that didn't add up. The dinners I hadn't been invited to. The stories Marissa had corrected. The phone calls Daniel hadn't returned. The list grew long. And as I wrote, a pattern began to emerge. I wasn't imagining it. She was deliberately isolating Daniel from me. Slowly. Methodically. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Marissa had always seemed so polite, so friendly. But now the kindness felt performative, like a mask. I remembered a conversation from months earlier, when I had tried to brush off. I had mentioned helping Daniel with a few bills while he was setting up the house. Marissa had laughed softly. "Oh, that's sweet. But I think we've got it handled." I had smiled, nodding, thinking she was joking. But now it made sense. She had been erasing my role from their lives from the very beginning. My support, my sacrifices, my love. It had all been rewritten as if it never existed. The realization made my hands shake. And yet, beneath the hurt, a fire sparked. Not anger, not revenge at first, just clarity. I would not vanish quietly. Not this time. The first clue that something deeper was going on came from an unexpected source. I was at the library one afternoon, shelving returned books, when a familiar voice stopped me mid-step. "Mrs. Reynolds?" I turned to see Mrs. Carter, an elderly neighbor from down the street. She had always been warm, The kind of person whose kitchen smelled faintly of cookies no matter what season it was. I just wanted to say, she hesitated, glancing around. I think Marissa has been saying some things about you. My stomach dropped. What kind of things? Mrs. Carter lowered her voice, leaning closer. She's telling people you're overbearing. That you try to control Daniel. That you don't respect their independence. I blinked, stunned. She's lying. Mrs. Carter sighed. I don't know about lying exactly, but she's definitely twisting the story. And it's working, people believe it. Twisting the story. The words echoed. That was exactly it. She had rewritten the narrative so that I appeared as the problem. I had spent years nurturing, supporting, guiding my son. And she had made it seem like I was the intruder. I thanked Mrs. Carter and left, my mind racing. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed evidence, something solid. Something that could show Daniel and everyone else the truth. The following week, I started paying attention to the small details. Emails I had never seen. Invitations I hadn't received. The way Marissa edited family group messages. Every omission, every subtle redirection, painted the same picture. It was in one of these messages that I found the first real proof. Marissa had written to my sister-in-law. Don't let your mother come by. She's trying to control Daniel. He doesn't need her hovering in the house anymore. I read the words over and over, my heart tightening with disbelief. She had been actively working to remove me, and Daniel hadn't noticed, or worse, he had allowed it. I knew then that this wasn't just exclusion. It was manipulation. I went home that evening and sat quietly in my living room, watching the shadows stretch across the carpet. My hands clenched in my lap. I felt a mixture of sadness, betrayal, and determination. I would not let her erase my role in Daniel's life. Not my sacrifices, not my love, not the home I had helped provide. The plan I started forming was not out of anger. It was out of necessity. If I wanted to reclaim my place, I would have to be smart, calm, methodical. I began documenting everything. Emails, text messages, even casual remarks from neighbors who had noticed the distance between Daniel and me. I saved screenshots. I wrote down dates. I reconstructed a timeline of manipulation. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand not just what Marissa had done, but why. She craved control, a perfect picture of family that excluded anyone who might challenge her influence. The more I observed, the more I realized her charm, her smiles, her polite corrections. They were all tools. For the first time in months, I felt a strange combination of fear and empowerment. Fear because confronting this meant risking confrontation with my own son. Empowerment because for the first time, I had a path forward. The day I discovered the full extent of Marissa's betrayal, I woke up with a quiet sense of dread. I had been piecing together the manipulation, collecting screenshots, text messages, and emails, but I didn't yet know just how far she had gone. I had no idea she had completely rewritten the story in Daniel's mind. It started innocuously enough, a routine check of my bank statements. I had been helping with the house expenses, sending money for the down payment, the furniture, even the landscaping. Small amounts at first, a bit here, a bit there, all with the understanding that it was a gift to help them start their life. I wasn't expecting repayment. I never had. But the thought of seeing my contributions vanish, rewritten as though they didn't exist, gnawed at me. And then I noticed something odd. There were receipts for renovations, new blinds, a security system upgrade, custom shelves, items that I knew I had paid for months ago. And attached to the digital receipts was a note. Paid in full by Marissa Reynolds. My heart sank. I called Daniel immediately. Daniel, can you explain these? I asked, keeping my voice calm. There was a long silence. Then finally he said, Mama, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulous. Daniel, these are the things I paid for. Your home. The money came from me. I know, Mom, I know, his voice trailed hesitant. But Marissa, she explained it differently. She said it was part of her savings, and I believed her. I didn't want to upset her. I felt a wave of disbelief. Betrayal. Not from him exactly. Not yet, but the way he had allowed the narrative to twist, to erase me from his life. It's not just about the money, Daniel, I said, my voice trembling. It's about the truth. The way she's been isolating you from me. She's been rewriting our story, our history. I didn't know she. He stopped, caught between his loyalty to his wife and the reality I was showing him. Yes, Daniel, I said quietly. She has. And I can show you. Every text. Every message. Every little thing she's manipulated. That afternoon, I went over the evidence with him. Screenshots, emails, receipts, even a calendar of the dinners I had been subtly excluded from. I saw the realization dawn on his face. Pain. Guilt. Confusion. Mom. I didn't see it, he said finally, his voice raw. I thought I was being fair to both of you. I didn't realize she was doing this to me too. Yes, I said softly. She wanted you to doubt your own mother. She wanted to make me the villain so you'd side with her. That's why you were slowly pushed out. I could see it in him, the guilt, the shame, the anger, but also the love. He still loved me. He always would. But we had a problem. Marissa had created a fortress of influence around Daniel. She controlled access to him, their home, their life together. And the only way to reclaim my space wasn't through anger, but through strategy, patience, and clarity. The next step was to confront Marissa directly, not with screaming or threats. Those wouldn't have worked, but with facts, evidence, a calm, undeniable truth. I scheduled a visit, careful to let Daniel know I would be coming. I wanted him present, not as a mediator, but as someone who could witness honesty triumph over deception. When we arrived, Marissa opened the door with her usual smile, polished, controlled, confident. But there was a flicker in her eyes, curiosity, suspicion. Hi, I said, carrying my notebook and a folder of printed messages. My tone was calm, even, controlled. I wanted to talk. Daniel stood beside me, tense, arms folded, but supportive. Marissa tilted her head. About everything, I said simply. The house, the money, the ways you've been isolating him, the ways you've rewritten our story. Her smile didn't falter, but her voice did. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. I took a deep breath. Marissa, these are text messages you sent to my sister-in-law. Don't let your mother come by. She's trying to control Daniel. He doesn't need her hovering in the house anymore. I handed the printouts to Daniel, who scanned them quickly, his eyes widening. And these, I continued, are the receipts for renovations and furniture, listed as paid by you, when I know I funded them. Every contribution I made, every gift, every bit of support, it's been erased. Marissa's face tightened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no argument, no denial that could hold. She began, but Daniel stepped forward. I see it now, he said quietly, his voice steady but heavy. I didn't see it before. I thought I was being fair, but Mom's right. You manipulated things. You rewrote everything. Her eyes flashed with something, anger, shame, fear. Daniel, she said, but he shook his head. No. I needed to see the truth. And now I do. The room was quiet for a long moment. I felt a weight lift from my chest. Not because she had admitted anything, but because Daniel could see it too. The isolation. The manipulation. The betrayal. And in that quiet, I felt something else. The first stirrings of power. The kind that comes not from anger, but from knowing the truth and having the courage to stand by it. After that confrontation, the air between us shifted. Not immediately, not completely, but enough that I could see cracks forming in the fortress Marissa had built around Daniel. For the first time, I wasn't just the mother on the outside, left wondering and worrying. I was someone who had evidence, clarity, and a plan. The first step was reclaiming my presence without causing chaos. I started small. I didn't storm into their house or demand apologies. I began by showing up where I was legally allowed. Public spaces, local cafes, even their favorite park. Daniel noticed. He noticed I wasn't angry, just steady, unshaken, consistent. Then came the paperwork. I contacted my lawyer, not to start a war, but to understand my rights. The house, while purchased for them, had been funded significantly by me. The more I reviewed documents, the clearer it became. Legally, I had leverage. Not to take their home away, but to ensure transparency and recognition of my contributions. When I shared this with Daniel, his relief was palpable. "I can't believe I didn't see it before," he said, shaking his head. "I thought I was protecting you both, but I see now. I was protecting her lies." We agreed on a plan. Confront Marissa again, this time with facts, support, and boundaries firmly in place. I wasn't going to yell or shame her. That wouldn't help. Instead, I needed to show Daniel and Marissa that truth carries weight beyond manipulation. A week later, I arrived at their doorstep with a folder of documents, carefully organized: receipts, bank transfers, text messages, and a timeline of events. Daniel followed silently behind me. Marissa opened the door, a practiced smile on her face, as if nothing had changed. "I thought we should review some things," I began calmly. "Not to fight, just to clarify the truth about contributions, decisions, and most importantly, the stories that have been told." Marissa blinked. Her posture stiffened, but she didn't interrupt. "That was a small victory. I've documented everything," I continued, opening the folder. "These are the payments I made for the house, the renovations, the furniture. Everything is listed. And here are messages where you've been telling others I'm controlling, when in fact, I've been supporting Daniel all along." Daniel flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to quiet anger. "Mom, I didn't realize." "Yes," I said softly. "It's not just about the money. It's about truth, about respect, about not letting someone rewrite our lives without consent." Marissa's smile faltered. She tried to speak, but Daniel held up a hand. "No, not yet. I needed to see it. I needed to understand how far this went." I felt the tension in the room begin to ease, just slightly. It wasn't a victory yet. That would come later. But I could feel the balance starting to shift. After that day, I focused on consistency and patience. I stopped leaving small gifts or unannounced visits. Instead, I engaged intentionally. Phone calls, scheduled lunches, and shared moments where I could demonstrate my love and support for Daniel without letting Marissa's shadow dictate the terms. Slowly, Daniel began inviting me back into his life. First for small dinners, then for a weekend at their home. Carefully, cautiously, testing the waters. Each visit, I kept my emotions in check. Calm, warm, grounded. I let my presence speak louder than any argument. Marissa naturally tried to regain control. But now, with documentation and Daniel aware of her manipulations, her attempts were transparent. A misdirected comment here, a subtle criticism there. But Daniel saw it, and I stayed steady. I didn't retaliate. I didn't shout. I simply existed as truth incarnate. And that was more powerful than any manipulation she could muster. The final turning point came during a family gathering. Daniel's cousins, aunts, and uncles were there. People who had known me for decades. Marissa tried her usual charm, trying to steer conversations and subtly assert dominance. But Daniel, now aware, gently interrupted her, sharing the story of the house, my contributions, and the manipulations she had attempted. The room went quiet. Eyes widened. Head shook. Marissa's face paled. There was no shouting, no humiliation, just the undeniable presence of truth and witnesses who could corroborate it. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile triumphantly. I simply felt peace. The weight of being erased, ignored, and manipulated began to lift. Once the truth was out in the open, the small, daily victories began. Daniel started including me naturally in plans. He made decisions transparently, no longer under Marissa's sole influence. I regained access to the home I had helped build. Not as an intruder, but as someone whose love, support, and history were recognized and respected. I also began to reclaim my emotional power. I stopped worrying about Marissa's approval or her manipulations. I focused instead on nurturing my relationship with my son, with patience, warmth, and honesty. And in that space I felt free. Not only had I reclaimed what was taken from me, but I had done it without compromise to my dignity. One evening, sitting in their living room with Daniel, the warm glow of the sunset streaming through the blue shutters, he reached for my hand. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for everything. for not giving up on me on us. I squeezed his hand. Daniel, you don't need to thank me. I just wanted truth and love to be stronger than manipulation. And finally it is. The air smelled faintly of dinner cooking in the kitchen, and the house, finally, felt like home. Not just for them, but for me as well. The truth spreading beyond just Daniel's eyes was slower, but inevitable. Families have a way of noticing what doesn't add up, and word travels fast in small towns. The cousins, aunts, and even neighbors began piecing together the narrative on their own, filling in the gaps Marissa had tried to leave empty. It started quietly, a whispered question here, a surprised glance there. I thought Mrs. Reynolds helped with the down payment, someone asked. Why wasn't she invited? At first, Marissa tried to maintain her facade. Polished smiles, casual deflections. She even posted cheerful updates on social media. A selfie with Daniel in the living room, captions like, "Our first home, our rules." But for anyone who knew the truth, the cracks were visible. The first public consequence came at a neighborhood block party. Marissa had tried to host a small gathering, positioning herself as the gracious hostess. I attended with Daniel, quietly observing. She started speaking about the house, taking credit for renovations, and praising Daniel for being so supportive. The people around her exchanged subtle glances. Neighbors who had known me for years, who had remembered the down payment, the furniture, the landscaping, the small gestures of love that had never gone unnoticed. One neighbor, a woman I'd helped with book recommendations at the library, leaned over and said softly, "I thought Mrs. Reynolds funded the house? You're the one who helped them get it." Her words were innocent, curious, but the effect was immediate. Marissa's composure faltered for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. I kept my calm, smiled gently, and let her unravel in quiet dignity. She had built a narrative to erase me, but now the community, witnesses who had known me for decades, was silently correcting it. Then came the family dinner. Daniel's extended family had gathered, sensing tension. Marissa tried to dominate the conversation, weaving subtle critiques of my parenting, my role, even my presence in Daniel's life. I stayed silent at first, observing, letting the evidence of truth and the reactions of others do their work. Finally, when she made a pointed remark about my supposed control, Daniel spoke up. "Actually, Mom didn't control anything," he said, his voice steady, calm, but firm. "She supported me. She helped fund this house, supported the renovations, and has always been here for me. What you've been trying to do, Marissa, is erase that. And it's not going to happen anymore." The room went quiet. All eyes were on Marissa, who stammered, her confidence cracked. I just wanted," she began, but no one was listening. Daniel had spoken the truth. The quiet acknowledgement of witnesses, the unspoken understanding from family, neighbors, and friends, was far more powerful than any argument. It was a public reckoning without humiliation. She didn't need to be shamed. The moral consequence was clear. Manipulation and dishonesty could not stand in the face of truth and patience. After that, things began to settle. Marissa's influence waned naturally, as it should. She became polite but distant, careful, aware that the truth had been revealed and witnessed. Daniel, meanwhile, grew closer to me again. He invited me to dinner without prompting. He shared plans for the house, asking for my advice in ways that felt natural. I also felt the emotional consequences for myself. I realized that power and dignity didn't require me to fight with venom. I didn't have to scream, threaten, or retaliate. All it required was clarity, patience, and unwavering commitment to truth. One afternoon, a few months later, I returned to the house on my own. Daniel was at work. Marissa was out. The blue shutters glowed in the afternoon sun. I opened the door, breathed in the familiar smells of home, wood polish, freshly brewed coffee, faint lavender from the candles I had brought, and I felt the first true sense of peace in months. I walked through the rooms, touching the countertop I had helped choose, glancing at the photos I had given them, and I realized something important. This house wasn't just bricks and paint. It was a symbol of love, patience, and perseverance. It represented the truth I had refused to let be erased. I sat on the living room couch, letting the sunlight warm my face, and allowed myself a small smile. For months, I had felt powerless, invisible, hurt. But now I wasn't. I had reclaimed my voice, my space, and my dignity. And that was worth more than any argument or confrontation. Daniel returned that evening, his presence quiet but comforting. We didn't need long speeches. A simple hug, a shared smile, and a mutual understanding said everything words couldn't. "You did what was right," he said softly. "I did what I had to," I replied, feeling the weight of months finally lift. From that point on, the relationship with Daniel, and even with Marissa, settled into something honest. There were boundaries, of course. Trust had to be rebuilt. But the manipulation had ended. The lessons were clear. Love doesn't mean being silent in the face of betrayal. And patience can be just as powerful as confrontation. I continued my routines, baking, visiting the library, volunteering. But now, I also spent time in the house I had helped create, fully welcomed, fully present, fully acknowledged. And every time I walked through that front door, I remembered the months of uncertainty, the betrayal, and the careful steps it took to reclaim my place. The sun would filter through the blue shutters, just as it had the first day I visited. And now I could smile, knowing that no one could rewrite the story that Daniel and I had shared. Not Marissa, not circumstance, not time. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges, but it doesn't erase lessons. In the months after reclaiming my place in Daniel's life and the home I had helped fund, I learned how fragile trust can be, and how resilient truth is when you hold it firmly. Daniel and I spent more evenings together, quietly. We cooked dinners side by side, laughed over old memories, and sometimes just sat in the living room, the quiet comfort of presence filling the spaces Marissa had tried to hollow out. The house smelled like fresh bread and lavender, the sunlight catching the blue shutters just right, and every corner whispered of hard-won honesty. Marissa was polite but distant. She no longer tried to undermine me, no longer twisted narratives behind my back. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, and there was no grand apology, but her behavior had changed. She realized, quietly, that her efforts to erase me had failed. The lesson was there, visible in Daniel's eyes, in the supportive looks of family and neighbors, in the documented truth I carried calmly but firmly. I started reflecting on my own journey. I realized that much of my suffering had come from feeling powerless. Not from the betrayal itself, but from allowing it to define me. For months, I had felt invisible in my son's life, watching as someone tried to replace me in ways that seemed small, harmless, even polite. But manipulation is never polite. It is subtle, quiet, and corrosive. And when it works, it leaves those who care deeply feeling lost. I learned that reclaiming power doesn't have to be loud or vindictive. It can be methodical, calm, and persistent. It can involve showing up, gathering evidence, and speaking the truth, not with anger but with dignity. And when truth is acknowledged, it carries a weight no charm, no lies, no manipulation can overcome. One evening, as I prepared tea in their kitchen, now a space I could comfortably occupy, I noticed a small detail I hadn't appreciated before. The curtains, the paint color, even the furniture arrangements reflected not just my son and his wife, but touches of my guidance, my suggestions, my love. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The house carried our story. Not Marissa's alone, not mine alone, but ours. And I felt a quiet satisfaction in that. Daniel came into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around me in a gentle hug. "Mom," he said softly, "I can't tell you how much it means to me that you stayed, that you didn't give up." I smiled, holding his hand. I stayed because love isn't passive. Because your life, our story, is worth standing up for. And because sometimes, the most important battles are fought with patience and truth, not anger. He nodded, eyes glistening. I understand now. And I'll never let anyone erase that again. It struck me then how much healing comes from presence, from consistent love, and from showing up. Even when it's hard, even when it feels like the world is against you. I realized that the months of hurt, of exclusion, of quiet manipulation, had also been months of growth. I had learned to see the world more clearly, to understand human behavior without bitterness, to trust in my own voice and judgment. And so life settled into a rhythm of quiet joy. I still baked my pound cakes, still cleaned my own house, still spent afternoons at the library. But now I also spent time in the house I had helped build. Not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as a recognized and integral part of Daniel's life. Marissa's attempts at control became irrelevant. They had been dismantled not by shouting or drama, but by steadfast truth, calm confrontation, and patient persistence. In that, I found a moral that stayed with me. Power taken through manipulation is temporary. Power reclaimed through honesty and courage endures. There were still moments of awkwardness. Still small reminders that trust can be fragile. But Daniel and I moved forward, stronger for having endured the storm. And I, for the first time in months, felt truly seen, truly acknowledged, and truly at peace. Sitting on the porch one evening, the golden sun dipping behind the trees, I reflected on everything. The smell of the jasmine in the garden mixed with the faint aroma of vanilla from the kitchen. The house was quiet but not empty. It was full of memories of love, of lessons learned the hard way. I thought about Marissa, too, not with anger, but with clarity. She had taught me, in her own way, how to stand firm, how to gather evidence, how to reclaim dignity without sacrificing compassion. And perhaps, in some small private way, she had learned that manipulation only works as long as the other person allows it. I smiled softly to myself and thought about the lesson I had carried through every phone call, every silent moment, every careful observation. Family is precious, but so is truth. Love is powerful, but honesty is stronger. And patience, combined with courage, can rebuild even the spaces someone tried to erase. Daniel came to sit beside me. We watched the last rays of sunlight fade over the rooftops of the neighborhood. I put my hand on his, steady, reassuring. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for staying. For never letting go." I squeezed his hand. "Always, Daniel. Always." And in that moment, I understood fully. Healing is not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life, your dignity, your story, and letting the people you love see the truth for what it really is. The house, once a battleground of exclusion and manipulation, now held something more profound. A home built not just on bricks and mortar, but on perseverance, love, and unshakable truth. Sitting here now, I can still remember that first phone call. The one where Marissa told me I wasn't invited to the house I helped build. The sting of those words, the disbelief, the quiet ache in my chest. It all feels fresh in memory, even after months of healing. And yet, I also remember the moment I realized something important. No one can erase the love you've given, the sacrifices you've made, or the truth you hold in your heart. I learned, the hard way, that family can be complicated. That people you trust can sometimes act out of selfishness, not realizing, or not caring, how deeply their choices affect others. But I also learned that patience, calm determination, and careful attention to the truth are more powerful than anger or revenge. Standing firm in honesty allows love to grow, even in places that have been shadowed by manipulation. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: your voice matters. Your presence matters. And sometimes reclaiming your dignity means quietly gathering your strength, showing up, and letting the truth speak louder than the lies around it. Have you ever been pushed aside by someone you trusted? Felt invisible in the life you helped build? I want you to know, you are not powerless. Standing up calmly, firmly, and with integrity can change everything. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, honesty, patience, and love are stronger than manipulation. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more stories of real-life family drama, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and join our little corner of understanding and empathy.